So I just made you the GM of the Utah Jazz. You tell me which of these trade packages you would rather have in exchange for Donovan Mitchell. You can either take the Knicks package of RJ Barrett, Mitchell Robinson, Obi Toppin, and 3 unprotected first-round picks, or you can have the Cavs offer that Utah ultimately accepted, which is Colin Sexton, Lauri Markkanen, Agbaji, 3 unprotected firsts, and 2 pick swaps. Maybe I'm way off on this, but I don't feel like those 2 trade packages are particularly close. And we know that in July, New York offered that first trade package. And of course, we know that Cleveland ultimately landed Donovan Mitchell with the second trade package. So how did we go from there to there? And how is Donovan Mitchell not a New York Knick? So there's a lot of different angles to this, and I think ultimately it's a good thing that Donovan Mitchell ends up in Cleveland for a variety of different reasons, which we're going to get to. But to me, the first thing you really need to break down with this Mitchell trade, and something that I feel like a lot of people aren't talking about, is how we ended up going from that Knicks offer in July to Utah accepting Cleveland's offer, and ultimately how much of a mistake that was for Utah, because I don't think the offers are particularly close. The players are better. I'd rather have RJ Barrett in any scenario over Colin Sexton or Lauri Markkanen or Agbaji. I'd rather have RJ Barrett over any of those guys. I think Mitchell Robinson is at least relatively interesting. I think Obi Toppin is at least relatively interesting. The players part of that package is significantly better. And then when you look at the picks, in terms of quantity, technically Cleveland's is better because you get the 2 pick swaps. However, especially in a scenario in which Cleveland is adding Donovan Mitchell without giving up Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, or Darius Garland, 100 times out of 100, I want the Knicks picks rather than the Cleveland Cavaliers first round picks. Unprotected, if they're the same, which they are, I would so much rather have the Knicks first round picks rather than Cleveland, because even if something goes wrong with Donovan Mitchell, let's say that 2 years from now, Donovan Mitchell's like, I don't want to be in Cleveland anymore, I'm going to leave. Okay, you're going to be a free agent, that's fine. We'll trade you, we'll get stuff for you. Even if for some reason they let Mitchell walk in free agency, Garland, Mobley, and Allen, if fully healthy, last year when all those guys are like 23, 24 and under, they would have been a 50-win team if Jared Allen didn't get hurt. They finished the year really poorly. They ended up as a play-in team, but if Jared Allen was healthy, they would have won 50 games. And that was in a season in which those guys are all still so young. So even if you just eliminate Donovan Mitchell from the roster 3 seasons from now, they're still better than that Knicks roster probably would have been even after acquiring Mitchell in place of Barrett and Toppin and Mitchell Robinson. And so to me, here's what I think happened. Here's like the secret of this, right? I think that in July, Utah was like, let's explore trading away Donovan Mitchell. Let's really take a look at this. They hadn't really committed to the idea yet, but they did want to, see what their options were. And New York was like, hey, we've been waiting on this. Like, this is something we've been planning for years. Let's jump on this. Here, you can have, this is like the best offer we're going to give you. RJ, 2 young guys, 3 unprotected first. What do you think? And Utah thought, well, that's a nice offer, but we're just not ready yet. We're going to wait this out. We're going to play this out, and we're going to see what other offers come our way. And as the process unfolded, New York realized that they didn't need to offer that much because there were teams willing to give stuff up for Donovan Mitchell, but no team was willing to give up as much as New York was because most people thought that Donovan Mitchell wanted to go to New York. So as the process played out, that Knicks offer went lower and lower and lower, which upset Utah to the point where they didn't really want to deal with New York that much, and that they would rather deal with a team like Cleveland that maybe they felt like the total compensation was better if they think the pick swaps are going to be good, if they think that Donovan Mitchell doesn't want to be there. But the biggest mistake made in this entire situation was not, New York letting Donovan Mitchell get to Cleveland as I thought initially. It was Utah not accepting this Knicks offer in July. It's at least 50% better to me than what they ended up getting from Cleveland. And there's 2 sides to that. One, if you're a Knicks fan, thank goodness they didn't take it, because as good as Donovan Mitchell is, that's too much. And if you're a Jazz fan, you're sitting there thinking, how did we not end up with that? Now, the only counter that I've heard to this is that Utah didn't want RJ Barrett because they felt like that's going to make their team a little bit too good. Like, obviously their goal is to trade away the vets, get all these first round picks, be bad, be in the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes, because there's no scenario in which you can get a player as talented as Wembanyama without selecting him with the first overall pick in the draft. If you're the Jazz, it just doesn't happen. Like, you don't get players like that unless you select them in the draft. And so getting RJ Barrett would have made them a little bit too good this year. Maybe they'd win 35 games. Their odds wouldn't be as good in the lottery. Even though that might be the case, I'm not someone that's going to start saying, hey, I'm going to actively make my team worse in terms of compensation in exchange in a trade because I want to tank that badly. Like, I don't want to get maximum value out of a player because I want to tank. That to me doesn't make any sense. And that is something that I feel like nobody's really talking about, is the fact that Utah is the team that really screwed this up. And ultimately, I don't think they got good value in exchange for Donovan Mitchell because I don't think the Cavs picks are going to be any good. And I don't really like any of the players. And they had a much better offer from New York in July. So my initial stance was like, how did the Knicks let Donovan Mitchell get away? It seemed like it was their guy to lose. And maybe they got, a little bit arrogant about their position in the kind of, negotiations to get Donovan Mitchell. And maybe that's true. And maybe they should have offered a little bit more. Maybe you should have been willing to give up Quentin Grimes, RJ Barrett, and 2 firsts in order to get Donovan Mitchell. But ultimately, the bottom line is Utah chose the other trade package for a variety of reasons, and they chose the wrong one based off of what they were offered in July. Now, the other part of this, in terms of why this, I think ultimately is a really good thing for the league, we need more trades like this, in my opinion, because every single time we have a star player become available, whether it be as a free agent or as in a trade, it's always the same handful of teams, right? Recently, it's been like, that Brooklyn could get him, the Knicks, the Lakers, sometimes the Clippers, right? Over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, it's Miami, it's the 2 LA teams, and it's the 2 New York teams in terms of like the top tier stars. And to me, I'm hoping, part of me is hoping that maybe this will set a bit of a precedent, because when you go and look at whether it be Donovan Mitchell or Kevin Durant, the guys that have, kind of been the headliners for getting traded this offseason, there were 2 different sides to this. There was where they want to go, which is those bigger markets, KD through Phoenix in there, but it was, a lot of Miami and LA teams and New York teams. And then it was the, hey, here's the best basketball situation for you. And those teams are like New Orleans, Memphis, Cleveland, teams that didn't have the luxury of being star destinations, that had to build their rosters up in a way that made sense. And they got all these young guys and they got all these picks, and they built their roster up in a way that actually required real knowledge of team building, and they have complementary players around stars. I think Cleveland is a perfect example of that. When you look at where they were 18 months ago compared to where they are now, getting Jared Allen basically as a throw-in in a trade, drafting Darius Garland at 5, Evan Mobley at 3. It's not like they got the first overall pick 4 years in a row, as they have in the past pretty much. They did the correct things over years and years of drafting to put themselves in a position to be a really good situation for Donovan Mitchell. Same thing with Memphis, same thing to a certain extent with New Orleans. There are teams out there like this that from a basketball perspective, it makes so much more sense for these stars to go to these teams, but they always want to go to the bigger markets. And given the fact that Donovan Mitchell is on a 3-year deal, I think it's a Cleveland team that's going to be very successful over the next couple of seasons, and it's at least relatively likely that he enjoys his time there and wants to re-sign. I'm hoping that maybe starts a bit of a precedent where these players realize that any market can be a big market. Giannis is beloved in Milwaukee. Dallas is still like a big-ish market, but like everybody in Dallas loves Luka. You can still have that resonance with a fan base without being in LA or Miami or New York. And maybe you should just go to a situation where they're going to be really good at basketball and they're going to be able to complement your skills, like Cleveland, like Memphis, teams like New Orleans to a certain extent. Maybe choose those places, prioritize those places, because not only is it better for you as a basketball player, unless you just want to go play with other stars without deep rosters, but also it's so much better for the league, because Donovan Mitchell in New York would have been fine. It would have been relatively interesting. Maybe they'll add another star, but that's something we've seen 100 times over. This Cleveland situation is different, and it's something where we're really going to see, does this work? Can you be a quote unquote smaller market team, make a big time trade like this as if you're one of the bigger teams and make it work? And if it does, I think that's so much healthier for the league. It allows every time there's like a star up to be traded, which I think happens what seems like every single offseason or trade deadline, it adds 1, more possibilities, which is more interesting, but 2, it gives the players more opportunities to go to teams that are actually going to be good, where they're not just going to waste their talents. And I'm hoping that the proper basketball thought on all this prevails, and that is, I don't really care about the name of the team or where the team plays. I can go and live wherever I want to in the offseason. I care about good basketball, complementary players, and not just playing alongside all these different stars. I think that, I'm hoping, is something that's going to go towards the wayside a little bit with, LeBron did it, Kawhi did it, Paul George, Kevin Durant, Kyrie. Go to teams that have complementary players regardless of the market, and I think that would be so much better for the league in the long term. And those, to me, are the 2 things that are not being discussed nearly enough about this Donovan Mitchell situation. 1, the fact that Utah really messed this up by not taking the Knicks offer in July, and the fact that the Knicks saved themselves by Utah not taking that offer. And then also, we need more trades like this. These are the kinds of trades that we need in the league, and I'm hoping that Donovan Mitchell is going to be successful there. There might be some issues defensively, as good as they were a year ago defensively when fully healthy. When you have 2 guards that have not been shown to be very good defensively in Mitchell and Garland, and then a wing and a coil that can guard but can't can't shoot. There might be some issues in terms of how they really structure those lineups so that they can be good on both sides of the ball. But when you have Evan Mobley, when you have Jared Allen, and when all these guys are so young, I think they're going to find a way to figure it out. And I really wouldn't be concerned if I was a Cleveland fan about the possibility of Donovan Mitchell leaving, because it's not like you traded for him with a 1-year contract. It's not like you traded for him with a 2-year contract. Like, this guy is going to be there for this season and at least the following. And then the year after that, if he hasn't signed an extension yet, yeah, there's some concern there. But the way that you combat that is, one, you be really hospitable. You make sure Donovan Mitchell knows that he is welcomed and happy in Cleveland. And also, you win some basketball games, because I still believe that even with all of the, star movement and players being unhappy and things like that, as long as you can put together, a 55-win team that's competing for titles, guys are going to be okay living pretty much wherever, in my opinion. Now, maybe that goes more towards this mindset that guys like Giannis and Jokic have shown, international guys that, they don't really care as much about the city, and maybe American guys do care more about that. But really, I think Cleveland's going to be good. I don't think the picks are going to really matter at all to Utah. And if they are good, I think that's all they need to secure Donovan Mitchell's long-term commitment within, the next couple of seasons. And even if that doesn't happen, they've done such a good job of putting together a really good young nucleus that it really wouldn't matter as long as they get something out of Mitchell in an eventual trade. So really, to me, the biggest loser here still is Utah not accepting the Knicks package in July, and then ultimately what they got in exchange for Donovan Mitchell from Cleveland. And I think overall, I'm hoping that the league itself is going to be a winner, and that, teams like Memphis and New Orleans, and in the future Oklahoma City, that have really built themselves up well, rather than just saying like, hey, we're this really interesting, big city team. I'm hoping that proper basketball roster construction will be more of a draw to these stars as a result of this Donovan Mitchell trade.